There is a divine breath that ignites purpose within the believer, a sacred force that does not leave a soul empty or wandering in confusion, and this powerful presence is recognized in both the Christian understanding of the Holy Spirit and the Islamic concept of Ruh al-Qudus as a heavenly source of strength, revelation, and divine support, breathing life into the hearts of those who seek truth with sincerity. When a person opens themselves fully to divine influence, something begins to awaken inside them, a stirring that cannot be explained by logic alone, because it is not simply emotion nor mental stimulation, but a supernatural movement that lifts a person out of spiritual dryness into a realm of divine companionship. This breath of God is not ordinary wind. It carries the power to awaken sleeping destinies, to break chains of fear, doubt, and hopelessness, and to stir the soul with fresh fire that pushes a believer forward with renewed passion for righteousness, faith, and connection with the Creator. When the divine breath enters a willing heart, it does not leave things as they were. It awakens an identity rooted not in weakness or struggle, but in divine empowerment, making a person more sensitive to guidance, more alert to spiritual realities, and more confident in walking the path laid before them by the Almighty. There are moments in a person's life when they feel empty, tired, and lost, as though they are walking without direction and striving without purpose, yet the divine breath reminds them that they were not created to live spiritually paralyzed or confused, but to walk with clarity, guided by a light that does not fade, a voice that whispers truth into their inner being and strengthens them through times of trial. This is not just emotional encouragement, it is a spiritual empowerment that gives courage when fear tries to dominate, faith when circumstances look impossible, and perseverance when quitting feels easier than pressing forward. The divine breath is a force that aligns the human heart with the will of the Creator, whispering to it that it is not abandoned in its struggle nor left alone in its journey, but rather accompanied, uplifted, and constantly strengthened by a heavenly presence that seeks to bring growth, elevation, and transformation. Once a believer becomes conscious of this spiritual reality, their attitude changes because they no longer fight battles from a place of isolation, but from a position of divine backing, supported by an invisible strength that cannot be defeated by external challenges. In the quiet moments of reflection, when a person begins to open their heart to divine influence, they may feel a stirring, a peace that descends gently upon their soul, or a sudden burst of inner conviction that calls them higher, urging them to shed fear, doubt, and spiritual laziness. This is the divine breath at work, a spiritual empowerment that both guides and strengthens, lifting the believer from stagnation into forward motion. When the Holy Spirit is acknowledged, or when one reflects on the Ruh al-Qudus as a force of purity and truth, they begin to understand that divine empowerment is not just for prophets and messengers, but is available to every heart that seeks closeness to God with sincerity and humility. This breath guides, comforts, encourages, and convicts. It challenges complacency and empowers faith to grow stronger, causing a believer to rise above their weaknesses and walk with spiritual confidence. The divine breath fills the heart not just with belief, but with a burning certainty that the Creator is near, actively involved, and ever ready to strengthen the soul that leans upon Him. A believer who walks with the awareness of this divine breath becomes more than just a passive follower of faith. They become a vessel of spiritual energy, someone who carries divine presence into their daily life, speaking words that bring hope, acting with compassion that reflects heavenly mercy, and facing adversity with unshakable assurance that they are not fighting alone. This inner empowerment is not pride, for it does not originate from the self, but from the Creator's presence within, guiding every step and illuminating every decision. When the divine breath moves, fear dissolves because faith rises, uncertainty fades because divine wisdom whispers direction, and weakness transforms into resilience because spiritual power fuels inner strength. A believer walking in this divine empowerment becomes like a flame that cannot be extinguished by the winds of hardship, for the breath of God sustains that fire, giving it continual fuel to burn brighter even when challenges arise. The heart that once trembled now stands firm, the soul that once wandered now walks in alignment, and the voice that once hesitated now speaks with conviction. Through the empowerment of the divine breath, a believer begins to see life differently. not as a random series of struggles, but as a divinely guided journey filled with opportunities to grow, serve, and rise into the fullness of their spiritual identity. When the divine presence rests upon a person, they start to think with clarity, love with purity, and act with purpose, no longer controlled by fear or confusion. They understand that divine empowerment is not meant to make them arrogant, but to make them courageous in righteousness, steadfast in hardship, and unwavering in devotion. It becomes clear that this spiritual breath does not simply visit, it desires to dwell, to remain, to walk alongside the believer daily, offering strength when tiredness hits, offering wisdom when choices feel confusing, and offering peace when burdens feel heavy. As this divine empowerment grows stronger within the soul, the believer becomes more aligned with their divine purpose, more attuned to heavenly guidance, and more confident in their spiritual identity. The breath of the Almighty does not leave a heart unchanged, for it ignites purpose, restores passion, and awakens a powerful awareness that the believer is never walking alone, never fighting alone, and never believing in vain. Walking in spiritual authority through divine guidance begins with recognizing that we were not created to stumble in darkness or be victims of life's uncertainties, but to walk as those who are led by a higher voice, instructed by divine inspiration, and strengthened by a power that flows from above and moves through the hearts of believers who submit themselves to spiritual direction. Spiritual authority is not about human strength, earthly titles, or outward influence, but about carrying a confidence that comes from being aligned with the Creator's will, standing firm on divine promises, and walking with an inner certainty that guidance is available in every step, every decision, and every challenge we face. When the Holy Spirit fills a believer's heart, or when the understanding of Ruh al-Qudus as a divine helper and supporter is embraced, a sense of spiritual direction ignites within them that transforms fear into faith, hesitation into obedience, and confusion into divine clarity. It is the awareness that we are not wandering aimlessly, but being led by a guiding presence that knows the path before us even when our eyes cannot yet see the outcome. There are moments when life presents crossroads with no clear direction, moments when choices feel overwhelming, and the future looks uncertain, but this is when divine guidance steps in and speaks softly within the heart of a believer, urging them toward decisions that align with higher wisdom, not worldly pressure. The more one yields to spiritual prompting, the more authority they walk in, because spiritual authority is born from obedience to divine instruction and trust in divine timing. When a person allows the breath of God to guide their spirit, they begin to walk differently, speak differently, and think differently, because they are no longer reacting to circumstances, but responding to spiritual direction. In this realm, authority does not come from personal power, but from alignment with divine will. And when a person is aligned, mountains move, obstacles shift, and breakthroughs happen not by human effort alone, but by spiritual force. Divine guidance brings assurance in uncertain times, and authority arises when a person stands not on shaky emotions, but on unshakable divine direction. When a believer understands that spiritual authority is directly connected to being guided by a divine presence, they begin to take steps with confidence rather than fear, because they trust that each step is orchestrated by higher wisdom. The Holy Spirit teaches, reminds, directs, and empowers. Simultaneously, the Islamic understanding of Ruh al-Qudus as a supporter and strengthener reinforces the belief that God provides spiritual backing to those He supports. This gives the believer a posture of authority, because they recognize they are walking with divine assistance, not in isolation. Fear loses its grip when a person knows they are guided, because uncertainty has no power over a heart that trusts divine direction. When divine guidance leads, spiritual authority follows. And when authority emerges, lives change, atmospheres shift, prayers carry weight, and declarations echo with power, because they are rooted not in human will but divine alignment. One who walks in divine guidance becomes unshakable in faith and unstoppable in pursuit of purpose, because they are not walking alone. But under divine instruction, spiritual authority also grows stronger. When a believer learns to listen deeply, discern spiritual impressions, and follow inner conviction without doubting the voice that guides them. Divine guidance is often gentle, nudging the heart in the right direction, giving peace when something is aligned with divine will, or unease when something is not. The more a person listens and obeys, the more authority they carry, because authority is built through faithfulness to divine instruction. The Holy Spirit, or Ruh al-Qudus, does not force but guides, and when the believer chooses to yield, that willingness activates greater spiritual strength. Authority comes not merely from knowing spiritual truths, but from walking in them, living them, and allowing divine guidance to shape every choice, every action, and every moment of the believer's journey. A guided life becomes a powerful life, and a powerful life becomes a life of spiritual authority that influences others, breaks spiritual barriers, and carries a presence that brings light wherever it goes. The journey of divine guidance also involves trust, especially when the path ahead is unclear or when obedience leads into unfamiliar territory, because spiritual authority is grounded in unwavering trust in the one who leads. Trusting guidance means stepping even when the next step is not fully visible, believing that the divine source guiding us sees the full path, even when we do not. When faith and guidance work together, authority becomes natural, because a guided person becomes a fearless person, and a fearless person becomes a spiritually authoritative person. The one who trusts divine timing, even when waiting feels challenging, is the one who ultimately walks in greater authority, because they are not rushed by panic or pressured by external voices, but anchored in divine instruction. When a believer acts under divine direction, even simple words become powerful, because they are backed by divine authority, and even small steps lead to great breakthroughs, because they are ordered by a higher power. When divine guidance fills a person's life, they begin to walk with purpose, speak with wisdom, and act with courage, because guidance fuels authority and authority fuels impact. The spiritual authority that flows from being divinely led causes a believer to stand firm even in storms, to speak boldly even in resistance, and to persevere even through trials, because they know they are not acting by themselves but under divine instruction. The Holy Spirit, or Ruh al-Qudus, strengthens the heart, ignites faith, and confirms divine direction, enabling the believer to move with certainty even when others doubt or hesitate. Spiritual authority is not loudness but assuredness, not aggression but confidence, not pride but divine alignment. And it grows stronger as a person remains guided by a divine presence that does not fail. A life led by divine guidance becomes a life filled with spiritual power, a life where authority flows from obedience, confidence flows from guidance, and direction flows from divine presence, causing the believer to walk with strength, speak with conviction, and live in alignment with a higher calling. Transformation through inner renewal and heart surrender is not a surface-level change, but a deep spiritual rebirth that begins when a person realizes that true strength does not come from their own willpower, but from allowing a divine presence to reshape their inner being. When an individual opens their heart to the Holy Spirit, or embraces the understanding of Ruh al-Qudus as a divine purifier and strengthener, something begins to shift internally, a softening of the heart, a lifting of heavy burdens, and a reawakening of spiritual identity. Transformation is not a quick emotional moment, but a continuous flow of spiritual renewal where old habits, fears, and doubts begin to fall away because divine presence is working from within. This renewal does not require human perfection, but a surrendered heart that says yes to being reshaped, refined, and uplifted by a higher power. Surrender is not weakness. It is the opening of the soul to receive spiritual empowerment that cannot be produced through human effort alone. When the heart is surrendered, divine breath begins to move freely, and where there is freedom for divine presence to move, transformation becomes inevitable. Inner renewal happens when the believer allows divine presence to confront inner struggles, doubts, anger, insecurities, and past wounds, not to shame them, but to heal and restore them to a place of strength, purpose, and clarity. This process of transformation is like a refining fire, not meant to destroy, but to purify, to burn away what is destructive and bring forth what is holy and powerful. It is here that the believer begins to feel lighter spiritually, more aware of their connection to God, and more confident that they are no longer bound by what used to hold them captive. Renewal of the inner being produces peace where there used to be unrest, hope where there used to be despair, and spiritual clarity where there used to be confusion. The Holy Spirit renews from within, whispering truth into the heart and revealing toxic patterns that must be released for growth to take place. Similarly, the understanding of Ruh al-Qudus as a force of purity and truth in Islamic thought reinforces the idea that divine presence uplifts those who open themselves to it, bringing their hearts into a state of increased piety, serenity, and spiritual strength. Transformation begins the moment a believer says, "Take over my heart, reshape my desires, renew my mind," for surrender is the gateway to renewal. As renewal deepens, the person begins to think differently, speak differently, respond differently, and even carry themselves differently because they are no longer operating from past wounds or fear-based patterns, but from a place of spiritual alignment. Their desires shift from pleasing people to pleasing God, their reactions shift from anxiety to faith, and their mindset shifts from defeat to victory. When divine presence renews the inner being, it rewires thinking patterns, breaks cycles of negativity, and instills a new sense of confidence that comes not from ego, but from spiritual identity. In this state of transformation, the believer realizes that their worth is not determined by failures or external approval, but by their connection to God's presence, which constantly renews and strengthens them. Renewal cleanses the soul from internal clutter and gives space for faith, gratitude, and peace to grow. The more the believer stays yielded, the greater the transformation. For divine presence does not force change, but nurtures it in surrendered hearts. A heart surrender is not a one-time act, but a daily lifestyle of saying, "Guide my thoughts, shape my desires, lead my decisions," allowing divine direction to continually refine and uplift the inner self. As the heart surrenders more deeply, resistance fades, fear loosens its grip, and inner peace becomes a steady foundation. The Holy Spirit renews by gently convicting, lovingly correcting, and powerfully strengthening, while Ruh al-Qudus is seen as a purifier that strengthens truth and righteousness in the soul, enabling deeper spiritual clarity and discipline. Through this inner renewal, the believer becomes more patient, more compassionate, more resilient, and more aligned with divine purpose. They stop reacting from the flesh or ego and start responding from a place of spiritual maturity and divine prompting. Their heart beats with purpose, their spirit resonates with peace, and their life radiates with quiet strength because they are no longer ruled by internal chaos, but guided by divine presence within. The transformative journey continues to grow stronger as the believer learns to let go of what hinders inner renewal, such as grudges, fear, guilt, pride, and self-doubt, and replaces these heavy burdens with trust, humility, forgiveness, gratitude, and faith. The transformation is not just emotional but deeply spiritual, changing the way a person sees themselves, others, and their life's journey. When the Holy Spirit renews a person from within, or when Ruh al-Qudus is embraced as a source of divine elevation, the soul begins to detach from worldly distractions and attach more closely to spiritual truth. This alignment produces a radiant confidence that cannot be easily shaken by external situations, because it is rooted in a deep awareness of divine closeness. Renewal restores purpose where it had been lost, ignites passion where it had faded, and strengthens faith where it had been weakened. A renewed heart becomes a vessel of divine flow, and a surrendered soul becomes a powerful instrument for transformation, not only within but also around them. As the inner renewal and surrender continue, transformation becomes visible to others through actions, words, and spiritual radiance, because true transformation is not hidden. It overflows and becomes a testimony of divine power working in a willing heart. The believer who has undergone spiritual renewal carries a presence of peace that calms others, speaks words that encourage and uplift, reacts to trials with surprising strength, and walks with a joy that does not depend on circumstances. Transformation through renewal does not eliminate challenges, but equips the believer to face them with a renewed heart, purified desires, and elevated understanding. They no longer see trials as obstacles, but as opportunities for deeper faith, greater surrender, and stronger connection with divine presence. Transformation through inner renewal and heart surrender creates believers who are spiritually resilient, emotionally balanced, and purpose-driven, not by their own strength, but by the continuous flow of divine presence that renews them daily, reshaping them into stronger vessels, more aligned spirits, and more radiant reflections of divine empowerment. Living as witnesses of divine power in daily life is not about mere words or religious claims, but about carrying a visible, undeniable presence of faith that influences the environment, uplifts others, and demonstrates that divine strength is real, active, and present in those who truly believe. A believer is not simply someone who holds a belief mentally, but someone who becomes a living testimony, a demonstration of how divine presence transforms fear into courage, weakness into strength, and uncertainty into unwavering conviction. When the Holy Spirit is actively at work in a life, or when one is supported by the concept of Ruh al-Qudus as a divine force strengthening the righteous, that individual begins to reflect divine qualities in attitude, behavior, and reactions to challenges. They no longer live as ordinary beings, but as vessels carrying divine authority, radiating spiritual stability even in chaotic circumstances. Their life becomes a silent sermon, a visual message that God is active in this world. Empowering those who trust in Him. Living as a witness requires experiencing divine power personally, allowing it to first transform one's inner struggle before it can be shown outwardly. A true witness has encountered breakthrough where there once was bondage, peace where there once was turmoil, and joy where there once was despair. And because they have experienced divine intervention, their life naturally testifies to what faith can do. Every time they choose forgiveness instead of bitterness, faith instead of fear, and obedience instead of rebellion, they become a witness of divine power in action. This daily demonstration of faithfulness and resilience reveals that divine empowerment is not abstract or distant, but real, accessible, and active in the lives of those who stay connected to divine presence. A believer walking in divine power does not need to force influence on others. Their life becomes evidence that draws people toward the source of that strength. Witnessing divine power in daily life also means walking with a sense of spiritual awareness that every moment, every conversation, and every challenge is an opportunity to reflect divine influence. When guided by the Holy Spirit or strengthened by the concept of Ruh al-Qudus, the believer becomes sensitive to when to speak peace, when to offer encouragement, when to stand firm in truth, and when to extend compassion. This is not performance-based living, but spirit-led living, where the believer becomes a carrier of divine comfort to the broken, a reminder of hope to the discouraged, and a vessel of strength to the weary. Divine power is not only seen in miracles and wonders, but in the ability to endure trials with unshaken faith, to face setbacks without surrendering hope, and to rise stronger from adversity because divine presence sustains and strengthens. Each act of love in the face of hatred, each step of faith in the face of fear, each courageous choice to trust divine guidance becomes a powerful witness of divine activity in human life. Those who truly live as witnesses of divine power in daily life do not rely solely on external circumstances to confirm divine presence. They live from an internal assurance that God is with them, strengthening them from within. This internal certainty gives them the boldness to speak truth, to stand for righteousness, and to act with integrity even when others compromise. Their lives are marked by consistency and devotion, unwavering trust in divine wisdom, and visible peace even in storms. When they pray with conviction, not empty words. When they walk with confidence, not hesitation. When they face spiritual battles, they do so with authority, not fear. Their life becomes a continuous testimony that divine power is not reserved for spiritual leaders only, but for every believer who chooses to walk in surrender and alignment with divine presence. Being a witness of divine power does not mean never facing struggles. Rather, it means responding to struggles with a spirit of faith instead of defeat. When others panic, a witness stands firm. When others complain, a witness trusts. When others rely only on logic, a witness leans on divine guidance. Their endurance becomes a testimony, their faith becomes evidence, and their victories become living proof that divine power is active. They carry a presence that brings calm to chaotic situations because divine peace resides in them. People may not always understand the source of their strength, but they recognize something different about the way they handle life, the way they speak hope, and the way they influence others without forcing anything. This quiet yet powerful witness draws others toward seeking the same divine strength, making the believer not only a recipient of divine power, but a carrier of it into the world. Living as witnesses also means speaking boldly of divine goodness when the opportunity arises, not with arrogance or self-exaltation, but with humility, gratitude, and certainty. A witness is not ashamed to acknowledge that their strength, wisdom, and peace come from divine empowerment, and then they are willing to testify of how faith has changed their life. Their words carry weight because they are backed by a life consistent with their testimony. It is not about preaching with loud voices, but living with deep conviction. In both Christianity's emphasis on the indwelling power of the Holy Spirit and Islam's recognition of Ruh al-Qudus as a source of divine empowerment, the believer is encouraged to live in a manner that reflects divine influence through righteous living, compassion, wisdom, and spiritual strength. These qualities become a light that guides others toward truth and offers encouragement to those seeking spiritual strength. Ultimately, living as a witness of divine power in daily life means consistently reflecting the strength, wisdom, peace, and love that come from divine presence, not through self-effort alone, but through full dependence on spiritual empowerment that flows from God. It means walking with faith that divine guidance is actively shaping each day, facing challenges with courage that comes from inner assurance, and carrying oneself with a quiet authority that comes from being connected to a divine source. Every day becomes an opportunity to demonstrate what divine power looks like in real life through perseverance, integrity, compassion, faith, and unwavering devotion. In doing so, the believer's life becomes a glowing testimony, a living example that divine power is not a distant concept, but a present reality moving through the lives of those willing to walk as vessels, carriers, and witnesses of heavenly strength.